Well, hi, everyone. Big news on the Key Bridge. The Maryland Transportation Authority on Tuesday, April 28th, 2026, I'm recording this video on May 1st, 2026, announced that they are not going to continue with Kiewit on their progressive design build contracts for the replacement of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, Maryland. This parting of the ways occurred prior to initiating phase 2 of the design and construction work. They're using the term off-ramping rather than just saying they're kicking Kiewit off the project. I mean, as part of this progressive design build, there was always the possibility that Kiewit wouldn't remain through the end of the project, but it was anticipated that they would. So this is a major setback because now they have to go out and find a replacement contractor, which is going to undoubtedly add several months to the eventual completion of this project. I think it's probably going to add another year, but we'll see. This statement from MDTA indicates that Kiewit was working on the phase 1 contract, which includes taking the design up to 70% level, which they did in 14 months. It also includes the construction of a work trestle, as well as the foundations at the main piers for the bridge. And Kiewit will continue working to wrap up their phase 1 activities through the end of 2026. And this CBS News story, I've got links to these stories in the description, indicate that Maryland Transportation Authority would have preferred to stay with Kiewit, but they think they just couldn't do it because they were too far apart on price, although officials wouldn't indicate what that price difference was. But Maryland officials were expecting maximum cost to not exceed $5.2 billion, which is up considerably from the $1.7 to $1.9 billion estimate that state officials put out there when they were asking the federal government to cover the cost of this bridge design and replacement project. So now these same people are apparently having their own estimate now of what it should cost, greater than the initial estimate, and they think their number is better than Kiewit's number, apparently. But there's been numerous stories about this situation this week. Here's an E&R article, which references that Congress had already fulfilled then President Joe Biden's promise of full funding for a replacement bridge, and Trump officials have furthered that commitment with the expectation that costs and schedule be reasonable and cost effective. One question I have is, to what extent did state politics factor into the ballooning costs or expectations for this bridge project? Maryland Governor Moore has made several statements touting how great a job they're doing in the administration of this replacement of the Francis Scott Key Bridge.
You know, this is now the fastest moving major project in the country, and our plan is to keep it that way.
So the goal is for the new bridge to be done in 2030.
This tragedy happened under my watch as governor, and I want to be the governor to cut the ribbon to reopen the Francis Scott Key Bridge.
Well, conflating a couple of things there, it seems. The schedule before the announcement of Kiewit's departure for phase 2 was to complete the bridge by November 2030. Now he says the objective is just to complete it while he's still governor. So presumably that means either getting it done while his current term is going on, or he plans to get reelected and then the bridge gets done. I don't know. But MDTA's got a really good YouTube channel, and they provide frequent updates as to what's going on. You can see Kiewit's been out there installing the work trestle as well as the foundations for the permanent bridge. Now let's look at the statement here from Bruce Gardner of MDTA. He's the executive director.
We've always had the option, if we couldn't agree on a final price with Kiewit, to seek new contractors. So that's what we're doing now. I think it's important for everyone to know that work will not stop. Progress will continue. Kiewit's going to remain our partner for at least the remainder of the year. That work that's going on now, permanent foundation pile, building a work platform, that will continue.
Kiewit delivered strong results throughout phase 1, including helping design the new bridge expeditiously from 0% to 70% in only 14 months.
So while this week's decision was entirely the state of Maryland's, the MDTA continues to work in lockstep with the Federal Highway Administration. Both parties want to ensure that the Key Bridge is rebuilt as quickly, safely, and cost-effectively as possible.
In May, the MDTA will host an industry forum and provide further updates on the procurement process.
Well, a little bit of tap dancing there, in my opinion. Kiewit, under their Phase 1 contract, is going to be working through the end of the year. How reasonable is it to expect that they can get a different Phase 2 contractor onboarded and put them to work before Kiewit finishes their Phase 1 work by the end of the year? It looks likely to me that there's going to be a gap because of the delay between now and getting a second contractor on board for Phase 2. As I mentioned, Kiewit's taken their design up to 70%. This is what the bridge is going to look like. Whoever takes it to 100%, there's not going to be that many readily apparent changes from a broad perspective. But I wish these politicians wouldn't get so hung up on it's the biggest, it's the quickest, what have you. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you hear in China. Now, there are some key aspects of this bridge, no pun intended, that would no doubt drive costs. But this bridge was originally completed in 1977. In today's dollars, the cost is around $400 million. So you're looking at about a 10x in today's dollars in the replacement costs, greater than 10x. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The design standards are different. There's more regulatory requirements. Material costs have escalated far beyond the rate of inflation, the consumer price index. There's a lot of factors, but it's pretty discouraging. But again, one of the key aspects of this bridge is it's got 230-foot minimum clearance over the Patapsco River versus 185 feet before. The bridge is 2 miles long versus 1.7 miles formerly. The main towers are going to be almost 250 feet taller than the previous towers. So just a lot more bridge going on with the planned replacement. And Maryland officials wanted it to be apparently under $5.2 billion, which I was shocked that the federal government was still going to go on with the project at a $5.2 billion cost. And certainly there's no guarantee that the second contractor that comes in is going to be any cheaper than what Kiewit was at. And this shows you just how quickly things can change. This was from a Kiewit presentation on June 2nd, 2025 on their work for the replacement of the Key Bridge. And it just talks about the difference between Phase 1 and Phase 2. So Phase 1, project development, pre-construction design. This says design to 50%, but apparently it went up to 70%. Developing a cost estimate and schedule. And then Phase 2 was project delivery, finalized design, permitting, and complete construction. So now someone else is going to do Phase 2. There's a CBS News story about Kiewit's response, where they indicated that although we're disappointed by this decision, we are committed to completing our current scope of Phase 1 work in addition to integral early construction packages. Kiewit is focused on supporting the success of this vital project for Maryland and the surrounding region. They go on to say, while we've been unable to reach agreement to advance into Phase 2, the full construction phase, we're proud of the progress achieved and the strong working relationship developed throughout Phase 1. So this comes from the Francis Scott Key Bridge Rebuild website. One of my staffers pointed out that it's a misleading schedule because it looks like over half the work's already been completed. So they show equal scale to periods measured in months compared to periods measured in years. So a little misleading there. And I agree with this headline that the bridge is undoubtedly going to be delayed in its completion well past 2030. And this article here mentions that, yes, of course, progressive design build allows for a different contractor in subsequent phases. The goal is to use the same contractor throughout. And apparently the percentage of jobs where a different contractor is selected for later phases of the work is only about 10 to 15% of bridge replacement projects. So this is fairly unusual to have happen, and it's certainly undesirable, I think, in terms of cost and schedule, but we'll see. And of course, one of the inherent difficulties here is that you have the federal government saying they're going to front the full cost of this bridge replacement project. And at the time, President Biden made that announcement. Congress later backed him up on that. But the new Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, has indicated that he expects Maryland officials to be financially responsible in their pursuit of the replacement of this bridge, which brings up an interesting twist. Federal officials are going to front the cost, and then Maryland officials expect to claw back a bunch of money from the owners of the Dali for their negligence in having all the events that led up to the power outage on the MV Dali that resulted in taking out the Francis Scott Key Bridge. But as I pointed out in previous videos, the pier protection was wholly inadequate. They only had these 25-foot diameter dolphins located well away from the bridge piers, both upstream and downstream on the main span. And as I pointed out in this previous video, Maryland is not a comparative negligence state. It's a contributory negligence state, which means if you're a little bit negligent, in the case of the state of Maryland, you may not recover any money. And we know also that the owners of the Dali are trying to use a 1851 Maritime Act to limit their liability to the salvage value of the cargo. So it's far from certain whether Maryland officials are going to recover any significant money from the owners of the Dali. And it just makes me wonder, at what cost is this replacement going to be too much? From a national pride point of view and for regional commerce, I certainly understand the need to replace a bridge that had been in place for nearly 50 years before that. But what kind of bang for the buck are federal taxpayers going to get here? I think it's a fair question. And I'm curious, what's the max cost that the federal government's willing to front here? I think that should be stated. I can understand maybe not wanting to put that number out publicly quite yet while they're trying to negotiate with another contractor, because obviously you don't want to sign essentially a blank check here. But I just can't understand what is really going on to push this schedule and drive up these costs. It's just quite shocking. I mean, we're talking the kind of money that was spent to design and build the Gordie Howe Bridge from the US to Canada. And all that money is being fronted by the Canadian government. And it's a much bigger structure than the Francis Scott Key Replacement Bridge. With that, I want to thank those of you who've contributed to buy me a coffee. That's one of the better ways to support this channel. I also want to thank the channel members and those of you who've contributed to Super Thanks. I'll continue to follow this story and do updates as we go. Thanks very much, everyone.